Your ability to seed smart just arrived with the John Deere 1870 Air Hoe Drill for small grains and oil seeds. Designed around the exclusive Conservapack opener, the 1870 offers precision depth control for consistent fertilizer and seed placement and packing. The 1870 ensures seed safety and optimal uptake of the fertilizer by the crop, not the weeds. With a paired row or single row sideband setting of the fertilizer relative to the seed, you'll really appreciate the results, even emergence and strong stands from this industry-leading design. Based on more than 20 years of research, design, and experience, the unique Conservapack opener on the 1870 puts into practice the best of both worlds, agronomic principles and engineering advancements. It allows you to get all the benefits of direct seeding, including reduced erosion, improved water use efficiency, and greater fertilizer efficiency. The fertilizer opener can shatter shallow soil hardpans to improve root development and water infiltration. Plus, the Conservapack system has been designed to handle high residue levels with excellent clearance and flow. This video will walk you through the basics of setup and field operation. It also includes tips for adjustments to maximize your machine's performance in a majority of field conditions, so you can optimize your returns. You need to first attach and adjust the John Deere Category 405 hitch on the 1870 to your tractor, or to the rear of a tow-between air cart. You need to locate the bolts holding the cast hitch separate from the safety chain. The short parallel length A-frame hitch at the front of the 1870 should be as close as possible to being level with the ground when pulling the seeder in the field. This will minimize forces on the ratchet jack and bell crank linkages. The 1870 Air Hoe Drill and cart combination requires 4 SCVS for operation. One handles the raise lower function of the frame, another is responsible for setting the hydraulic control pressure of the accumulators. These are used for packer wheel and seed opener downforce and fertilizer shank trip force. The third operates the fold-unfold of the wings, and the fourth will operate the seed cart's fan auger. In order to unfold the machine, the fold pins must be removed, and the fold valves must be moved to the outermost position. If the pins are not moved to the outer position, you will not be able to unfold the machine. You also need to move the raised lower lockup valve located on the seeder billboard to allow the machine to be raised and lowered for field operation. Once it is fully unfolded, walk around to inspect the machine to make sure it is field ready. For safe transport, the fold pins must be installed in the fold support. In order to do this, you must first move the fold valves to the inner position and install the pins in the fold support. You also need to turn the lockup valve on the billboard to hydraulically lock the machine in the up position. Never raise or lower the drill in the folded position. Before taking any steps to level the seeder in the field, you first need to confirm that the in-frame tires have at least 70 psi and the gauge or caster wheels on the front have 45 psi. You may perform these steps in the yard or in the shop. Next, use a tape measure to ensure the stroke controls on the 2 mainframe cylinders are set the same. The factory setting is 5.5 inches from the base of the screw-on lug on the cylinder shaft to the bottom of the second stroke control block or donut. It is very important that the 2 cylinders are always set the same to avoid any twisting of the rock shaft. And you should make sure the ratchet jacks on the gauge or caster wheels are set as shown in the operator's manual. The outer wheel ratchet jack should be at 23.25 inches and the inner gauge wheel must be at 23.5 inches from center to center of the pins. Care must be taken when leveling seeders behind the tow-between air carts to account for the changes in the load from full to empty. This can result in significant rear hitch height changes due to the deflection of tires and overall tire sink in the soil. To compensate for this fact, it's recommended that you ensure tire pressure is at least at recommended levels and use dual wheels when available. Other than these suggestions, the best way to level the seeder is when the air cart is half full, so you'll minimize the effect of extremes from the cart being full or empty. Leveling the 1870 Air Hoe Drill is very important to achieve accurate and consistent depth control for fertilizer placement. Experience has shown that it is not possible to do the final leveling of the machine when it is raised out of the soil by simply comparing frame or tip heights. By far, the best success at final leveling is in the field by measuring the working depths of the fertilizer tips. The top of the slot in the fertilizer tip is exactly 4 inches from the depth the tip will cut in the soil. The bottom of the slot is about 3.25 inches. So when the machine is stopped and the openers remain in the soil, it's easy to remove the loose soil rolled out of the furrow with a shovel or hoe and use a screwdriver or a small pointed object to determine the actual depth of the fertilizer depth compared to the undisturbed surface of the soil. First, select a relatively level and representative area in the field to perform the following steps to level the seeder. Do not use areas packed from excessive traffic, low-lying soft areas, or areas where previous tillage operations have left a very uneven soil surface. Set the initial packer wheel pressure at 0 psi on the gauge. Too high packing force can lift the seeder and make it difficult to achieve proper leveling in some soils. When setting accumulator pressures, the tractor's hydraulic flow should be turned down to about 4 on the SCV control to allow the gauges to move slowly when the charging valves on the billboard are moved. This allows more control to dial in a pressure setting as the gauge will move slowly. Pull the SCV lever in the cab to supply constant flow to the charging circuit. Locate the packer pressure valve on the billboard and slowly open it to adjust to the proper pressure. Once you have achieved the desired pressure on the packer wheels, close the valve. Then locate the fertilizer shank pressure valve and adjust it to the desired pressure using the same steps. As a starting point in most operating conditions, the fertilizer shank pressure should be set at 700 psi on the gauge, and the packer pressure should be set at 500 psi. From this point, pressures can be adjusted as needed per field conditions. Hard ground may require fertilizer shank pressure of 900 psi, and rocky soils would require less pressure to allow the shanks to trip when they hit an object. Wet soils normally require between 600 and 700 psi, and drier soils may require up to 900 psi or more. The seeder frame needs to be completely unfolded, and the 6 by 28 inch main fold cylinder should have the shaft fully extended in the slot, provided so the wings can float down and up freely, and lowered fully into the ground. The seeder should be moved at least 10 meters, 30 feet, and then stopped and left in the soil at full working depth. It's very important to follow a consistent sequence of steps to level the 1870, as each adjustment can affect what is necessary for other settings. The overall order of leveling adjustments is this: achieve 3.5 to 4 inches fertilizer shank depth, level the main frame from side to side, level the main frame from fore and aft, front to back. Level inner and outer wings relative to main frame at the in-frame wheels. Fine-tune the gauge wheel settings. Please note that all of the following step-by-step instructions are based on an operator standing behind the seeder and facing the direction the tractor and seeder will move. The machine should be very close to level from side to side when delivered from the factory or setup location. You can verify this by checking the depth of the slot in the fertilizer tips at the 4 corners of the main frame. If the seeder does not appear level, we recommend it be raised, driven forward, and lowered into working position for 30 feet or so, and then checked again. We suggest that an operator check all settings at least twice before making adjustments, as unusual variations in the soil surface can provide inaccurate measurements. The drill must be close to depth before leveling can be done. This creates the load or suction necessary on the drill frame to properly check level. You must check depth at this time. A simple way to verify actual working depth is to use a straight 30-inch long 2x4. Just dig down in 3 side-by-side furrows until you locate the fertilizer or bottom of the fertilizer furrow. Then move any loose soil out of the way so that the board can lie on top of the original soil surface across the furrows. Now, you can measure down to the bottom of each furrow to determine if they are at similar depths for fore-aft leveling. This makes it easy to check at 3 or 4 locations. If one row is noticeably shallower, you can then stop the seeder and adjust for it. If one row is shallow, you need to adjust fore-aft. If 3 or more rows at this location are shallow, you need to adjust side-to-side leveling. This same procedure can also be used when leveling the seeder overall. Remember, the shank pattern is the same all across the frame. You have a front, middle, and rear row opener in every 3 furrows. If it's necessary to make a main frame adjustment side to side, the adjustment is done at the left rear side of the rock shaft. A threaded bolt goes through the lug on the rock shaft. Typically, the bolt will have the same amount of threads on both sides of the locking nuts when it is level. Moving the lug outward on the thread rod will lift the left side of the main frame relative to the right side and vice versa. If the front row of fertilizer openers is deeper than the rear row on the main frame, it means the hitch needs to be raised relative to the tractor or air cart. For a large change, you can move the cast hitch, and for small changes, loosen the lock nut on the ratchet jack on the A-frame hitch and lengthen the ratchet jack. This adjustment is most easily done when the seeder is raised slightly out of the ground. Remember, once the final adjustment is made, the ratchet jack lock nut needs to be tightly locked and the handle left loose so it will not initiate ratcheting on its own. Take note that if the front of the machine is running too high, it will cause every 3rd opener to leave a big trench. To level the wings relative to the main frame, check the setting of the 1 1/4-inch adjustment bolt above each wheel on the wings. This typically leaves the factory or setup location with about 18 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch of exposed thread above the top nut. The operator should observe all front and rear fertilizer tip depths at the corners of the wings. We again suggest that this be done at 2 or more locations in the field before making any adjustments. Make sure the cylinders have been phased. If a wing is consistently too shallow compared to the main frame, you need to raise the wing frame wheel to lower the frame. This is done by loosening the nuts on the adjustment bolt and pulling the hydraulic cylinder and frame wheel up. Make sure mud on main frame tires is not creating the inaccurate readings. You'll end up with more exposed thread above the top nut. It's not wise to make changes of more than 1/4 inch at a time. Be sure to retest with the seeder in the ground. Typically, only very minor changes are required to achieve a satisfactory level across the seeder. The gauge or caster wheels do not carry a large load when the seeder is lifted out of the ground. However, when the seeder is in the ground and being pulled forward, the draft load is pushing back and upwards on the fertilizer openers. This results in a loading which forces down on the seeder hitch at the front and on the gauge wheels. So the gauge wheels can see significant loading in the hard soils or clay-type soils, which can create increased draft. Experience has shown that the rear row, outer 1 or 2 openers will occasionally be seen running shallow, when the rest of the seeder is considered good and level. If you find this, the simple solution for this situation is to lengthen the ratchet jack on the inner gauge wheel of a 56-foot seeder by 1/2 inch. Remember, once the final adjustment is made, the ratchet jack lock nut needs to be tightly locked and the handle left loose so it will not initiate ratcheting on its own. Take note that if the front of the machine is running too high, it will cause every 3rd opener to leave a big trench. To level the wings relative to the main frame, check the setting of the 1 1/4-inch adjustment bolt above each wheel on the wings. This typically leaves the factory or setup location with about 18 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch of exposed thread above the top nut. The operator should observe all front and rear fertilizer tip depths at the corners of the wings. We again suggest that this be done at 2 or more locations in the field before making any adjustments. Make sure the cylinders have been phased. If a wing is consistently too shallow compared to the main frame, you need to raise the wing frame wheel to lower the frame. This is done by loosening the nuts on the adjustment bolt and pulling the hydraulic cylinder and frame wheel up. Make sure mud on mainframe tires is not creating the inaccurate readings. You'll end up with more exposed thread above the top nut. It's not wise to make changes of more than 1/4 inch at a time. Be sure to retest with the seeder in the ground. Typically, only very minor changes are required to achieve a satisfactory level across the seeder. The gauge or caster wheels do not carry a large load when the seeder is lifted out of the ground. However, when the seeder is in the ground and being pulled forward, the draft load is pushing back and upwards on the fertilizer openers. This results in a loading which forces down on the seeder hitch at the front and on the gauge wheels. So the gauge wheels can see significant loading in the hard soils or clay-type soils, which can create increased draft. Experience has shown that the rear row, outer 1 or 2 openers will occasionally be seen running shallow, when the rest of the seeder is considered good and level. If you find this, the simple solution for this situation is to lengthen the ratchet jack on the inner gauge wheel of a 56-foot seeder by 1/2 inch. This raises the front of the frame and effectively lowers the outside rear openers. For 40-foot seeders with this situation, you should lengthen the ratchet jack on the A-frame hitch to raise the front end of the seeder at the wing hinge point, which lowers the outside rear openers on the wings. To achieve optimal seeding success, it's important to have everyone operating the 1870 Air Hoe Drill with ConservaPack openers fully understand how the machine is intended to work. Quite simply, the fertilizer shank and tip are intended to do the majority of the soil opening. This will create a V-shaped furrow from the depth the tip is operated. When running at 3 to 4 inch depths, it will open a furrow about 3 inches wide at the surface of the soil. The packer wheel is then following in the furrow made by the fertilizer opener. It is pushing or forcing down on the firm and loose soil in the furrow. The packer wheel then controls the depth the seed opener penetrates into the side wall of the furrow. So at the factory setting of 5, the seed openers will typically be 1.5 to 2 inches below the original surface of the soil and 1 to 2 inches above the bottom of the furrow cut by the fertilizer tip. This allows the seed openers to cut a small shoulder or furrow into the edge of the primary furrow cut by the fertilizer tip. The result is that the seed is placed on firm, undisturbed soil, which greatly enhances germination. The seed will be packed where it is placed and typically ends up with about 3/4 to 1 inch of soil over the seed in the finished furrow. As explained earlier, the fertilizer tip is what does the primary opening of the soil. Experience has shown that 700 psi on the fertilizer shank gauge will typically keep the shank firmly in most soils. This equates to about 255 pounds of force required to trip the opener. If fertilizer shanks are noticeably moving or tripping, increase the force until they're only moving occasionally. Then further increase the force by 10% to provide the minimum force required for good furrow opening, but easy tripping if it strikes an obstacle. The fertilizer depth is set by adjusting the nuts on the 2 main frame cylinders. Remember, they have to be kept equal. Reducing the opening between the donuts and the top of the cylinder is the same as lengthening the cast end to the donuts. An adjustment of 1/2 inch will raise the whole seeder frame by a full inch. No other adjustments should be required. The packer or press wheel is important to assist in maintaining seed opener position in the furrow and to press or consolidate the soil above and around the seeds. If pressure is too low, as can be noted by the packer wheel coming off the ground or bouncing a lot, then poor seed placement and packing will result. If packer wheel pressure is too high, the packer wheels can effectively lift the seeder at least partially out of the ground, which will be evident by shallow rear row furrows. We recommend that you start with about 500 psi pressure on the packer accumulator gauge, which provides about 90 pounds of downforce on the press wheel. If you wish to make changes, we suggest that you do not change it more than 20 pounds at a time. Just be sure to recheck again. A simple way to tell if you have the right amount is to stop the seeder with it still in the ground. Take one hand and rotate the wheel. If you're not able to turn it, you're packing too heavy. If you're able to turn it, but it's pretty difficult, you should be very close to the right pressure. And if it spins very easily, you're not applying enough packing pressure. The seed openers have all been set from the factory at setting number 5. The angle provides a slight lead into the soil for the paired row opener and will require about 75 to 90 pounds of force to trip. If any change in the angle of approach is considered, you must look at it when the seed opener is fully engaged in the soil. This is when the packer arms are in the operating position. The angle of the seed opener is changed at the front of the mini spring can. To increase the angle of the approach, the 2 half-inch nuts have to be turned in. Moving 3 threads on the adjustment bolt is equal to 4 degrees, which is the recommended approach angle. Once set, the outer nut has to be torqued to 100 to 110 foot-pounds, or the nuts may loosen in operation. The force is set, so a load of about 75 to 90 pounds is required to start the seed opener tripping back. It's intended that the seed opener can trip when it strikes an object or becomes loaded with residue, so the trip will shake off residue. However, excessive opener movement is not a good idea, as it will cause premature wear at the pivots. To change the spring force, loosen the 1-inch lock nut and increase or decrease it as indicated on the decal. A full revolution changes force by 11 pounds. The depth position of the seed opener relative to the packer wheel is obtained by sliding the seed opener up or down and reading the number above the top plate of the seed opener mount. An easy way to change depth is to use the wrench provided or a 12-inch or longer 1.5-inch wrench to loosen the 1-inch bolt and opener jaws. Then use a battery or other powered impact to buzz the holder open. Set the seed opener as desired, higher number for deeper, and then torque the 1-inch bolt to 75 pounds. For any seed opener adjustments, we recommend changing 4 or 5 openers to the projected desired setting and checking the seed placement results a couple of times before changing all the openers. The 1870 uses the positive locking clamp to ensure the seed opener does not move. This design avoids the wear of a pin and hole adjustment. The first cause of excessive seed opener movement is that the fertilizer tip is not opening a sufficient furrow, so the seed opener has to do too much furrow opening. The solution is to lower the fertilizer tip, which you should do in half-inch steps. The second reason is the seed is too deep in relation to the fertilizer depth. The solution is to lower your fertilizer. The third reason for excessive seed opener movement is that the spring force is not set high enough. Simply increase the force 1 turn on 4 or 5 openers and re-examine in operation. When satisfied with the setting, you can adjust all the seed openers. John Deere engineers have discovered that some operators have used the same paired row openers for 3 or 4 years, seeding close to 20,000 acres. If you're experiencing durability issues, it can be due to fertilizer opener not deep enough and not providing sufficient initial soil opening, seed opener is seeding too deep in relation to fertilizer depth, the seed opener is working too hard. The spring trip force on the seed opener is set too high, so the paired row opener has difficulty tripping when it hits an object. Your fields have too many stones. If adjustments do not improve wear, we suggest switching to the more durable single row opener. The paired row seed openers have been developed to work in most soil moisture situations. However, it has been found that in certain instances they will plug. This can be due to turning while seeding, as is required around wet areas in the field. Excessively wet, Sticky, clay-type soils may also cause plugging.